the hearty applause for later. I don't know if I deserve it yet. We'll see. First, I guess I just need to let you know about my constraints. One of them is 2 pieces of green tape. I came in and they wanted to show me around. Okay, and they said, first of all, you're going to be broadcast through our private system, and you're welcome to move around as long as you stay within the confines of these 2 pieces of tape. For those of you in the back, I'd like to show you what's going on here. I'm now on the starboard side. It's a fairly massive deck. I'm now on the port side. I joke that I drive a pretty big carbon footprint truck, and I have more room driving to work than you're giving me to work. But that's okay, because they told me, and I apologize, particularly the online audience, that a lot of this is going to happen. Okay? And that what I have to say is a lot more important than what I look like, so we're not going to worry about that. Okay, let's get down to business. Could I have the agenda, please? This is today's menu. Let's think of it more like I am your maitre d', and I'm going to bring you through a several course menu. Go ahead and bring that up. We're going to first talk about atoms and molecules. I hope that this will end up being meaningful, but for the moment, I'm willing to make it provocative and just say, okay, we're here to talk about innovation, and he wants to talk about physics class. I don't know about you, but when I had physics class, it gave me a headache. It still does. So I would promise not to make it a physics class. Then we're going to move into the conversion of atoms and molecules to digits and bits, because that's really going to be the premise for our discussion today. That's where I believe innovation lies. And I'm going to give you a model of business innovation that I think, after speaking with the Admiral and several of the staff here, may be a very valuable model for us to consider. So I'm going to maybe call an audible and spend a little more time on that than I was planning, and hopefully there'll be some discussion around it. And finally, because I had to have some way to end this, I just said, okay, I'm supposed to be here talking about being innovative, so I came up with some thoughts about being innovative, some of which you may have heard before, and hopefully 1 or 2 little gems that you may not have. When I speak to corporate executives, and I do an awful lot of executive education, it's an interesting concept, executive education. They are willing to pay me thousands of dollars to tell them what they could have read in my book for 140. Somehow I think that's an upside down business model, but I don't really even have to shield my eyes to take the check. So I've acquired a taste for it. But when I'm speaking with executives, I tell them that I want to make sure that your time is well spent, and I want to leave you with at least one nugget, the most profound thing I can say. And I tell them what I'm going to tell you. This may not come as a surprise to you, but I really, really want you to consider it, and not consider it in an offhanded manner. This whole computer thing, this whole digits and bits thing, this wired revolution, this is not a fad. It's here. This is it. This is the world you live in. So if you're still struggling the least little bit with acquiring a comfort level, get moving. Because without a comfort level and an understanding of the fact that it's coming whether you like it or not, the transformation's going to happen whether you like it or not. It's not about being left behind. You're going to be crushed. And I'm speaking you in the collective, not you in the individual. You in the individual, everybody understands, you keep up or you get out of the way. But in the collective is what we're here to talk about today. And I'm going to be focusing on being innovative as a high-performing unit, rather than being innovative as a high-performing person. Okay? Let's go. Consider the activity that you spend most of your time doing every day. Just ponder that for a minute. Go ahead, give me a... You may not think about it this way, but most of what you do every day is think about atoms and molecules and rearranging them. Right? I mean, our food, our shelter, our automobile, transportation, doesn't really matter. These are all molecular, atomic and molecular information problems. They're very expensive. They're very expensive. We take them for granted. You know, Lieutenant Commander Grunlett took me by the pier, and I'm just amazed. I'm looking at all this magnificent military for my country. And he said, you know, he said, after you're around it for a while, he said, sometimes you get to the point where you don't notice it. And I can appreciate that. I'm around some advanced technologies, and I don't walk in the room and suddenly become odd, although I really do. I'm kind of like a little kid. Okay, when it happens, I just, you know, I get that, when I feel that thing back here, I know I have to pay more attention to it. But we take atoms and molecules for granted because they have always been there. Okay? And they're very expensive. We just make them a part of the cost of doing business. Problem is, they got some problems. First of all, atoms and molecules are constrained. They're constrained by where they are, and they're constrained by how long they have to live before they transform to some other form of energy. The other side of this, and Albert Einstein was really the first guy to make us think about this, when he came out with his E equals MC2, and everybody goes, well, boy, this is pretty cool. What do we do with it? And he said, nothing really. He said, because it requires more energy to get this energy. And that transformation process is where the expense is. We tend to think of a daily life of atoms and molecules with information just being the means to an end. The end is the transformation of the atom and the molecule, the relocation of the atoms and molecules, and any information that is associated with doing that is just our vehicle. And what I want you to think about is to turn that upside down. That the atoms and molecules are the problem, and the information are the symptoms by which we will solve this problem. We've set the premise that atoms and molecules are a form of activity. Now, let's consider that an alternate activity is digits and bits. Okay, we know about, when we think of digits and bits, do you think of anything other than media? Well, let me ask you a question. Can somebody identify an industry or a job classification that is not primarily technology, information technology dependent? Really? You know, it's interesting that you would say that. I'm having a new deck and I just had a new addition put on my house. Okay? And the carpenters that came in brought a laser that shot a grade everywhere on the property by simply walking around with a stick and listening to it beep. They're not using framing squares anymore. They're using lasers. They're not determining board feet by writing it on another piece of board feet. They have a calculator that converts everything into board feet and all the board feet into the materials list and the materials list to Home Depot. It's technology dependent. Could we do it without it? Sure. And I think that's why you identify that. Could we do these things without technology? Yeah, we just wouldn't be nearly as good at it. The cost would go up. Why? Because there's more atoms and molecules involved in that process than there are digits and bits. Every time you convert an atom and a molecule to a digit and bit, you reduce your transaction cost at that point, at that locus, by a factor of 8 to 10. That's demonstrated and documented. Our bit problems, interestingly, still can't get it right, are often solved by atoms. Okay, the Admiral mentioned that I have written textbooks. I consider the publishing process to be one of the more perverse processes that in media, because let's consider it in a logical sense, in an implementation independent sense. The idea we'll call electron flow, digits and bits. So the idea occurs at the digital level. I transduce it through my fingers on a keyboard to a word processor. So other than a little bit of physical transduction, it remains digital. It is edited digitally. It is transmitted digitally. It is manufactured digitally and put on a bunch of atoms and molecules and thrown in a truck and distributed to people. Okay? So where's all the cost in the printing industry? You've never really thought about the printing industry, but where's all the cost? It's at the printer. It's in the tree. It's in the atoms and molecules. The digits and bits have cost us nothing. Okay, so how many of you are Kindle owners? Do you like it? Yeah? Are you ever going to buy a book that isn't electronic? Of course you will. Of course you will. I got students that will complain about the cost of my textbook, or any textbook. And I'll say, do you know you can get this in e-form for about $50? Oh, no. Why not? Well, you know, you can't do this, you can't. I like the feel of a book. I know.
Parents don't.
Yeah, but the parents don't. That's right. Now, here, let me digress just a little bit because I want to give you a feel for the reality of atoms and molecules versus digits and bits. Supposing I wanted to start a company called Tomatoes.com. Tomatoes.com. Tomatoes.com will sell any kind of tomato, all varieties of tomatoes grown throughout the world. They have the finest quality. They will deliver them to your door within 24 to 48 hours from anywhere in the world, and they have a double your money back quality guarantee. How many people would buy from Tomatoes.com? Look at that. About 5. Who absolutely under no circumstances would buy from Tomatoes.com? You wouldn't, sir. Can you tell us why?
Taste, quality, the firmness. I mean,
Taste,
you can't
quality.
get any of that through the digits and bits. That's only
Firmness. What do you mean by firmness? In other words, you want to go to the store.
freshness, how ripe it is. So being able to actually touch it, feel it.
I mean no disrespect, but you realize that you've now come out in the open as a tomato fondler.
I've got 2 complaints out there right now.
No convictions. Right. Tomato fondler. Yeah, I grew up, my grandfather was Greek, and we would go visit him in Tarpon Springs in the summer, and he'd take me to the butcher, and you know, he just really wanted me to grow up and be Greek, and it just didn't work out. But you know, he would take the melons and thump them, and he would look at the eggs and then pick a certain egg, and then he would fondle the tomatoes. So when I grew up to be a young man, I was on my own. I would go to the store, and I would pick my produce, and I would thump the melons and look at the eggs and fondle the tomatoes. I had no clue what I was supposed to be doing. And most of us do not. I'm glad you helped me out. Now I know what I'm looking for. But I did it, okay? It's a genre. That's what's called a genre. It's a thing that we do. And we get used to doing it that way. And then we can't figure out another way to do it. We can't ever imagine a world where we wouldn't do it that way. Where do you buy your produce?
Normally out at the farms.
Right from the farm?
Yep.
Okay, well that's good, because that's going to stay atomic for a while. But most of us are going to buy it at the grocery store. I don't know what the big grocery store chain is here. Down where I'm at, it's Publix and Winn-Dixie. Okay? Can anybody tell me what business Publix is in? Or Winn-Dixie?
Distribution.
They're in the distribution business?
They redistribute.
They redistribute. Anybody got another idea?
Making money.
Yeah, that business is making money. Okay. What specific business would you, if you said Publix is in the blank business?
Marketing.
Marketing, grocery,
Retail.
retail. You know what? They're not in any of those businesses, actually. They're in the real estate business, folks. They're in the real estate business. Go look at their balance sheet. Go take a look at where their capital asset lies. That's the business you're in. Their capital asset is real estate. They have chosen to use the atoms and molecules of their real estate to deliver goods to you in the form of groceries and household goods, and to allow you a venue to fondle the tomatoes. But look at where their real estate is. Real estate are on big corners, high traffic corners. And one thing we don't have enough of is housing density in those locations where we wish to do business. So you got to know that one of these days they're going to figure out that the marginal revenue of allowing you to fondle tomatoes on that busy corner is way low compared to the marginal revenue of selling to a developer and putting 40 floors of luxury condo there. Now, if you think that is some Luddite prediction, you're crazy. It's happening right now. It's happening while we're talking about it. And I guarantee that it's going to happen until it is completely devoid of any opportunity to squeeze another dime out of it. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that suddenly we will have to buy from tomatoes.com and that there won't be any venue for which to fondle the tomatoes? I don't think so. It's what's going to happen is you're going to pay for the pleasure of fondling the tomato. Most of the cost of the tomato will be in the place where you stand to touch it. We're going to have to get rid of these genres. If we're going to be innovative, we got to know that there's people being innovative around us, and they're going to innovate us right off our feet. And that's about the best example I can give you of that. Let's go ahead. Go ahead. Again. Up. Did we read that already? There we go. Using atoms for a solution to a BIDS problem is costly. BIDS are just much cheaper. The instant you convert from a primarily atoms and molecules environment to a digits and bits environment, immediately, at that moment, your transaction cost has dropped by magnitude. Here's the best part. You will begin to see the benefits of that conversion immediately. Yes, sir.
So, not to ask you a question?
Please.
Let's use a supermarket example. Let's stick with that. Supermarkets for a while were introducing these automatic checkout lines, but they're actually, starting to take them out because they've lost that human element of the transaction. So to me, they tried to do the digits and bits. People aren't liking it. What do you make of that?
It's exactly, I think it's metaphorically the same as the e-book versus the paper book. Okay? Just because we don't like it, I guess what I'm trying to say in his non-confrontational matter is whether we like it or not doesn't matter. Whether we like it or not doesn't matter. If the transaction cost can be reduced, the purveyor, the businessman is going to reduce the transaction cost. If you don't like it, you will pay more. When you are tired of paying more, you will do it the new way. Okay? I don't want to sound dogmatic. I'm just trying to tell you that's the way it is. That's just the way it is. Also, bits are completely nonpartisan, and I'm going to give you a quick story about that. Let's go ahead. A little story about banking. Before there was Bank of America, which is actually I'm a customer of Bank of America, and I affectionately refer to them as the Bank of World Domination. Okay, that's their goal. That's their corporate model. Before there was Nations Bank, and this was during the period when banks weren't allowed to be big. Okay, banking was done at the state charter level, and you couldn't cross that line, or all of a sudden you were a monopoly, and there were a bunch of problems with that. I had a chance to listen to Hugh McCall, who was at the time the chairman of the board of Nations Bank, and they were kind of evolving into being a behemoth in the banking industry. He was speaking to senior executives, and he wanted to talk about competition. And he said, who can tell me who our biggest competitor is right now? So everybody kind of waited a minute, gave a little thought, and then you began to hear the usual suspects. Deutsche Bank, Hong Kong Bank, Citibank, Bank of Asia, and all these world, global, pretty atomic banks. And he said, those are all formidable foes, but he said, that's not our biggest competitor. Now, let me digress a minute, because you know this, being around the military, there is this concept in business and probably in military that is referred to as a career debilitating move. Each of us possesses the ability to make it, okay? And there was a guy in the room that didn't, and somebody, he didn't get the memo about it. And so when Hugh McCall was pausing the appropriate level of time to say, I haven't really heard our biggest competitor, and then he said, I think our biggest competitor is Microsoft. Now, the career debilitating move came when this former vice president said, well, but Mr. McCall, with all due respect, Microsoft isn't in the banking industry. And McCall kind of looked over his glasses then and he said, yeah, but my point is they could be in the morning. They could be in the morning. Why? How could Microsoft become a bank? How could they do it? Okay, they could make it easy. They could deliver the banking service. I mean, what does it take to be a bank? All right, we got, yeah, they could acquire a bank. But I mean, what does it take to be a bank? Got to have money. Okay, I saw a thing on Bill Gates the other day. Is $67 billion. That's Bill. Okay, and he and Warren Buffett are racing to give it all away before they die. And I want to help. I'm going to write and say, I'm down with your plan, Bill, and I'm going to help you. So Bill wouldn't have any problem having money. You have to have brand, because banking's really based on trust. They got brand. Microsoft could be a bank in the morning. Here's the dirty secret. They wouldn't have to play by any of the banking rules that our banks have to play by. Because right now, we have another little atoms and molecules and digits and bits problem. We don't have cyber law that's effective. The banking industry says that if you want to have an online banking presence and you have an existing banking charter, then you must comply with the covenants of your existing banking charter in your online presence. Makes sense, makes perfect sense to me. And then, of course, the law is silent on what happens if you don't have an existing banking charter and you don't wish to operate as a conventional bank. Bill could put his servers in the Bahamas or on a private island that he bought and brought the electricity in. And he doesn't have to play by reserve requirements. There are no rules. There are no rules. Now, if that's not a competitive threat, I don't know what is. See, what Hugh McCall was trying to say is quit thinking about the ones that are there. Think about the ones that aren't. Let's have the next slide. What business is Microsoft really in? I asked you about what business Publix and Winn-Dixie was in. My premise is that they're actually in the real estate business. Here's some things I just pulled kind of off of Microsoft's corporate thing. They own Skype. They got the business solutions division, the online, the servers and tools, the phone division. What business is Microsoft in?
Data exchange.
Data exchange, okay? It's a good idea, data exchange. Anybody else?
Global domination.
World domination, yeah, exactly. What business do you think? How do you describe that? Digital, communications. Let's have the next slide. What if I showed you this? Did you know that until recently, Microsoft was the largest travel agent in the world? And until recently, until they sold it off, Microsoft was the second largest used car dealer in the world. CarPoint. They own all these things, or a significant share. What business are they in? Let's have the next slide.
Electronic powers.
They're in the bits business. They're in the bits business. All of this, what's the common denominator? Digits and bits. They are not atomic. They are not molecular. What they are is a digital supply chain. They move bits. Now, the beautiful part is the nonpartisan part of this that we talked about earlier. Bits are nonpartisan. The bits and the supply chain used to move them don't care what the bits represent. It doesn't matter whether it's a phone call, satellite telemetry, a used car transaction? Tomato sales? Doesn't matter. You can move them. Think about that in comparison to an atoms and molecules supply chain, which is fit for purpose. You develop a supply chain to move atoms and molecules. You use atoms and molecules to move the atoms and molecules, and about all those atoms and molecules can do are move certain other atoms and molecules. Next slide. Bits are nonpartisan. They're not constrained. They're just a bunch of zeros and ones moving down this pipe, this thing that we call a pipe. You just don't care. It doesn't matter. That's why the transaction cost at the digits and bits level is so much lower than at the atoms and molecules level. Their supply chain costs are just plain lower. Now, my message here, if we're going to innovate, first thing we have to do is convert ourselves from a primarily atomic and molecular business model to a primarily digits and bits business model. That doesn't mean we're going to have digital warships. Although we already do, in reality, from a simulation perspective. What it means is that we've got to begin to develop an awareness of where atoms and molecules are that we could get rid of and make them digits and bits. Next slide. I wish I'd said this. Nicholas Negroponte said that. Nick, I've had occasion to meet him enough that I can call him Nick, and I think he might even take my call, or at least his aide would. Nick is the head of the Advanced Technology Laboratory at MIT. Nick makes things that we don't need. Really. I was talking to him a couple of years ago, and I said, so what's new? And he said, this is beautiful. He said, we have a 3 terabyte wireless transmission medium operating right now. 3 terabytes. 3 terabyte per second operational. He said, the problem is it can only move at about 3 feet. He said, we're only moving about 3 feet, but we're inching it out every day. I said, Nick, I get it, okay? I mean, you guys don't have nothing better to do with your life than invent things that we don't need. I said, tell me, why do I need a 3 terabyte wireless transmission medium? He said, well, think of it this way. He said, 3 terabyte per second would be the equivalent of every New York Times, every word in every New York Times printed since issue 1 until this afternoon's edition, with probably 50% of your bandwidth left in 1 second. Wow. That's right. That's a wow. That's one of those that makes, that's what it does, and all of a sudden I went, ooh. That's kind of cool. But what can we do with that? I don't know. I don't know. Would you like to own one? You bet. This is my prediction. We're now getting to the editorial portion of our program. In the next 50 years, our ability to move and store and manipulate atoms and molecules is probably going to double. It's probably going to double. We're getting good at it because we've been doing it since the dawn of man. However, our ability to move digits and bits is going to increase by a factor of 1,000 or more. And the complexion of the next 50 years, some of you are going to see the majority of that, is going to be changed as a result of that phrase. Anything that can be digital will be digital. Not could be digital, not might be digital, it's going to be digital. We're simply going to do it. Okay? The 3 fundamentally costly things we have: material, energy, and labor. They're all atoms and molecules. But if we develop a digital infrastructure, we don't really care. We don't depend upon these things anymore. We don't depend upon material or labor or energy, or at least not nearly as much. Most of our opportunities for innovation, which is really the basis for our meeting here today, are going to come from that phrase. Anything that can be digital will be digital. Consider this progression. The spoken word to the written word to radio to television, TV, video, computer, internet. I don't know what's next. I don't know what's next. But that's not a bad progression. And what's happening? Every step of that is a transduction process that is transforming portions of the atoms and molecules into digits and bits. And once you do that, you never have to go back. You now have this platform upon which to transform more atoms and molecules in different locations, tangential, perhaps unrelated, than you had before. Okay? Yeah, I like Eric Schmidt, the chairman of Google. I like his statement about the internet. The internet is the world's largest experiment in anarchy, in the dawn of human. Okay? We have no rules. We don't even know what to do with this thing. I mean, look what's happening. Okay, my students revel in the fact when I give them statistics from world internet usage and access and nodes and things like this, and we talk about Metcalfe's law and what connect means and things like that. And I tell them, look, they're excited that there's over 2 billion people that have access to the internet. I tell them that's not the big news. Big news is there's 4 billion that haven't got it yet. That's the market. That's what Hugh McCall was talking about. Okay? Quit looking at what's in front of you. Look at what's going to be in front of you as a logical consequence of what you know is happening. Forget what's in front of you. It's too late. It's late. We can't fix that. Okay? We have to deal with it, but we can't fix it. But what's not there yet, that you have an opportunity to influence. And anything that can be digital will be digital. So what are our opportunities? We're surrounded by information problems. I call these innovation opportunities. Okay? Anytime I find one, that's just an opportunity to innovate. Okay? I mean, all of these, these things that we think of in terms of atoms and molecules are really information problems. Finding a key for your car, queuing up at the restaurant in the order of how you're going to be served, locating a friend and event. These are information problems in their implementation independent sense. Okay? But we think of them too physically. Okay? We try and solve them physically. Okay? I mean, imagine go ahead. Imagine finding a friend at a large arena before cell phones. The answer was likely no. Okay? And what did you do? You lost a certain portion of the quality of the event. Instead of watching a basketball game, you're looking across at the crowd to see if you can see the face in this picture. Their face would be about the size of a period on a contract. Okay? But you're going to do it. You're going to do it. You're using a distinctly molecular problem and solving it with distinctly molecular solutions. And it doesn't work. Or if it works, it's the blind squirrel catching an acorn issue. The quote by Negroponte should be considered an axiom. Don't consider it a prognostication that's possible. It's right there on the cusp of a law. Okay? It's guaranteed to happen. Innovation is, in my opinion, lies with one's ability to assess the degree to which their given environment is molecular or digital. It's when you're walking in the halls, when you are doing what you do, when you're watching others do what they do. Stop looking at it in terms of a process and start looking at it in terms of where's the atoms and molecules and where's the digits and bits. And then don't worry about the digits and bits. That's a good deal. That's a good deal. Worry about the atoms and molecules. Be on a quest to eradicate them from your world. Okay? You see atoms and molecules, you are looking at a potential innovation opportunity. You may not be able to do it yet, but the sooner you begin looking at it that way, don't see warships, don't see rooms, don't see physical things. See things that should be, or could be, or will be digits and bits. And you will suddenly have more ideas than your brain can possibly process in that given moment. Guaranteed. Yes, sir?
Sir, what happens 20 years from now when your digits and bits and today robotics are taking the place of humans? What happens to humans 20 years from now? How do we earn livelihoods?
The moral answer is it's not going to be pretty. That's the ethical answer. The The practical answer is, why is that suddenly a problem? As we've been having that problem, again, since the dawn of the species. Technology will always be used to convert labor to capital. Always. And that's where we go from the collective to the individual. You know, I have students that'll ask me that, and I say, does anybody in here know what a buggy whip is? And most of them don't. Okay, most of them don't. I said a buggy whip was the accelerator in early forms of transportation. Okay, that was the go pedal. I said, now, at one time, there were a lot of people making buggy whips. They made good ones, they made run-of-the-mill ones, and there were craftsmen. As this industry began to wane, there were less and less manufacturers of buggy whips, and the logical scenario reduces it to, eventually there was one. And we have to consider the quality of that last buggy whip manufacturer. They didn't go out of business because they made a bad product. They went out of business because we didn't need them anymore. That's the facts. What happens to humans? They're going to do something different. They're going to do something different. That is where, at the individual level, don't stand still. Whatever you do, don't let anybody put you between two pieces of green tape. Is that a lamentable scenario? Yes, sir. Yes, sir, it sure is. It's also a fact. And that's the portion that we have to dwell on. That's what I meant at the beginning. This isn't a fad. This is happening. So we have to deal with that. And I don't think we do a very good job of dealing with the human displacement factor as a result of the development with technology. We develop technology and we go, boy, look at this cool thing we have. Well, what are the implications? Oh, we can do this, and we can do this, we can do this, we can do this, and yeah. I mean, you know, how about this? This is my personal philosophy. I believe that information technology and the digital revolution has allowed mankind to extend their mind and body into realms previously unimaginable by us. It's also allowed us to make mistakes faster and less detectable than any time in the history of our species. You get a bad process going at roughly the speed of light, and it'll be going fast enough that you won't even know it's a bad process anymore. And then there's that computer readout, that's that computer screen, that's that digital printout. You have to believe it came from a computer. I mean, my in-laws, you know, they want to tell me about things they saw on the internet. They don't want to ask me if it's true. It is true. It's on the internet. Okay? We know that. I mean, that's a human foible of ours. And that's why a lot of people are going to get burned by this. Because they're not going to change. They would rather have the paper book and complain about the price. They would rather squeeze the tomato. Yes?
I was just wondering, what do you tell your students about not being confined between the same degree you take? What do you tell them about that?
That's really a whole different process. That's, you know, that's the ability to break out of the mold. I think the short answer is exactly the message I'm delivering here at this point in the discussion, which is the green tape is atomic, it's molecular. That boundary is physical. Okay, digital is not physical. Okay, there's no physical property, and therefore we can't think of it and be constrained in the same way. So you want to get out from between the tape, get away from the atoms and molecules parsing the environment, or make your environment more digital. Every day that your environment converts from a primarily atomic and molecular foundation to a primarily digit and bits foundation is the green tape begins to fade. I think that's probably it, sir.
Well, for your class or whatever, I mean, in one sense, you're physically limited between those two green tapes. But in another, you're out in other classrooms right
precisely,
now.
Precisely. Now, what we have here is an information problem. Okay, let me show you what it looks like. Okay? I could have started from over here. I could have said, you know what, my best side is over here. I work from this side. Okay? They would have turned the camera around, but then I could have changed my mind. Okay? I'd like to get out amongst you. Okay? I'm not sure. It could be a hostile audience. I may not get back, but I'm willing to try. This is a digital problem. Okay? How would we solve it? Come on. We've got great analysts and technicians in here. How are we going to solve this problem?
More cameras.
Huh?
More cameras.
Now, there we go. We're solving an atomic problem with atomic stuff. Atoms and molecules to solve an atoms and molecules problem. Think digital.
Tracking feature on the computer or on the camera.
Whoa, tell us more about that.
Program it like you do to follow a golf ball.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. How do they do that? I mean, how do they do that? I can't even see my own ball. Of course, it never goes where I'm looking for it anyway. But that's a different story. No, a very simple piece of technology, RFID. Okay? First of all, we could turn this into this. Okay? And then, but that would put a wireless environment in the room. That's a security issue. Atoms and molecules problem that we have to solve with digits and bits. Okay? Now, we put that on, we put this on, and that camera has a little laser that is looking for this RFID device, and if I was dangling from the projectors, it would be showing it to everybody in the room. Now, we get some YouTube hits from that. I'll bet. You take the next slide. It's clear. I don't want to drive that nail any farther. We're going to change gears just a little bit, but I'm going to try and tie this together. By the way, just go like this when I've wasted everybody, when I'm starting to waste people's time, okay? Because I'll keep going. Go ahead and let's hit the buttons and bring this through. What we're looking at here is another axiom. Competitive advantage comes from research and development, period. You come up, you think about a way to get ahead, to take a step forward. If it is successful, it is achieved. You get that competitive advantage. Interestingly, it's going away the moment you have it, the moment you get it. It's fleeting. Competitive advantage is non-sustainable. Because we have a process called organizational learning. Now, what I mean by that is you get a leg up. You get that competitive advantage. The only way to exercise the value potential stored in that competitive advantage is to actually apply it, is to actually put it in motion. You have to launch it. You have to execute it. The instant you execute, everybody realizes you've got competitive advantage as a result of this action. And they are immediately going into a mode of figuring out what you're doing. And they will. We know this. I don't care whether it's the most secure, the biggest secret that we can possibly keep. It's not a secret when we have to use it. Okay? Now it's not a secret. Okay? People can reverse engineer things by looking at the outcome, the black box approach to analysis, and then working backwards. Well, there's only so many ways this outcome could occur, and we're going to work backwards. Eventually, organizational learning takes place and is done, and at that moment, your competitive advantage has now become what we call competitive necessity. Competitive necessity, in a business sense, is you will make no money. There will be no profit in doing this. You will only lose money if you fail to do this. A good example of competitive necessity is pay at the pump. Now, we could argue that it does get rid of a few people, okay, that it might maybe reduces the transaction cost, but nobody's making money at pay at the pump because it's a competitive necessity. I mean, when I got that E-light on, you know, the one where, not the first one, the one that says, I'm not kidding. I'm not messing with you, okay? I mean, I have pulled into gas stations that didn't have pay at the pump, pulled out. Pulled out. Take it again. I'll take the risk. I'm just not going to mess with it. I'm just not going to mess with it. That's when you know you have competitive necessity in place. What happens when competitive necessity is the level at which your industry or your sector is in? Everybody begins throwing money at R&D. And the cycle starts over again. Innovation is about finding something elusive called core competency. Can anybody tell me what core competency is? How do we define the concept core competency?
It's a standard that has to be met.
A standard that has to be met. Okay, that's competitive necessity. That's the standard that has to be met. If you want to play, you got to play at this level. So that's not really core competency. Yes, sir.
In the military, one of the things we think about is center of gravity, and that's that hub upon which all things depend.
Okay, critical mass type thing, or a critical element. Yes, sir.
It's a business's cash cow.
The business is cash cow. That's not actually necessarily true, but conceptually, I think I would agree with you.
Agility, ability to
Agility, ability to move. Yeah,
Foundation.
maybe. You could have agility as a core competency. I don't know that we would define core competency as agility. Yes?
The essence of what it is you do.
The essence of what it is you do. Okay, let's see. First of all, there are two parts to core competency. The first one, it must be something you do well. Okay? It must be something you do well. And it must be difficult for your competitors to imitate. If you don't have both of those characteristics, you have not identified the core competency. You might have something that you do well, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's your core competency. Let me give you an example from industry. Next slide, please. Okay, Cisco versus 3Com. We familiar with these two? I would hope so. Okay, go ahead. Cisco sells internet solutions and 3Com sells internet solutions. Cisco has a strong market branding and 3Com has a strong market branding. Now, so far, we have identified two things that they both do well. Okay? Cisco has high-quality products. 3Com, high-quality products. Cisco makes nothing. 3Com makes everything. Core competency, right here. Right here. I had a lucky break in my career. I was at Indiana University. While I was at Indiana University, part of my salary was funded, and I had the title of the John C. Chambers Eminent Scholar in Information Systems. Okay, John was a graduate of the Kelley School of Business, and he's the chairman of the board for Cisco, and he would regularly stop by in Bloomington and hang out, and $1 million would fall out of his pocket. And then we'd have the new John C. Chambers something. Okay? So I had occasion to have lunch with him and talk to him, and I really have queried him about Cisco and the evolution of Cisco. And he said, well, the advantage we had at Cisco was we started with a blank piece of paper. We could look at the marketplace, and then we could develop a company and an organization that could compete within that marketplace. But he said, I struggled to find a core competency. He said, no matter what I did in the conceptual design of the organization, all I ended up with was looking like the leader. I was 3Com, only I couldn't call myself 3Com because then I'd have trademark violations. So we had to think of something that developed a true core competency. He said, so we decided not to get into manufacturing business. Today, if you are unpacking a Cisco device, the odds of it ever being touched by a Cisco employee prior to that moment are almost zero. Cisco doesn't make that. Now, why does that create a core competency? Because 3Com already owns the atoms and molecules to make all their products. They can't stop. They're a drug addict. They're hooked on their atoms and molecules. They have to keep doing it because the best they could do, if they could divest themselves of those atoms and molecules, is look like Cisco. Is simply take Cisco's competitive advantage and turn it into competitive necessity. And then everybody's got a problem. Everybody's got a problem. So this is where their competitive advantage lies, in their ability to do something that the other guy would have a hard time doing. Would really have to become disruptive to do. Next slide. This is one of my favorite quotes, Barry DeGauss. The ability to learn faster than your competitors may be the only sustainable competitive advantage. I would argue that if you really wanted to have one organizational mission, one overarching motivation for everything that you do, it would be that. Our goal is to learn faster than our competitors, to be faster at learning than our competitors. And that would become very difficult to imitate. You acquire that as a core competency in this branch of the military or in any industry, boy, have you got a tiger by the tail. That's what it's all about. Next slide. This is some kind of, we're starting to get into the potpourri portion of our program, but information about information is more important than the information. Okay? That's the meta information concept and the metadata. We're only beginning to acquire a conceptual understanding of that. We don't really have a clue yet. I don't care what anybody tells you about big data. We don't have a clue of how to harness it. We're getting there, and we're going to get there. I mean, this isn't a, gee, this is like, you know, defining the meaning of life. No, we're going to get there. But it keeps, the more we do it, the bigger the problem space becomes. And we're just still trying to harness it. It's kind of like herding cats for a parade. It just ain't going to happen. TV Guide makes more money than all the 4 major networks combined. Did you know that? TV Guide is this little rag that is meta info. It's not the programming, it's just the information about the programming. Pretty cool. Google, Facebook, Bloomberg, the guys that are making the money, the guys that we're thinking about, they're at the meta layer. That's a world of information about information. And that is the epicenter, in my opinion, of innovation. Is acquiring information about information. Here's an interesting little digression. Can we store information? Do you honestly believe you're storing information? I don't. Information requires active processing. If we could store information, then why don't we call them information bases? We store data. Now, we might consider it information. I mean, we've acquired this, so let's store this report. The report that the Admiral brings up will be information. The very same report that he hands to me will be data, because I won't get it. It will have no meaning. I will not be able to apply the appropriate final processing step to transform that data into information. Here's the way I like to think of it, and to help students understand the difference. I think of data as all of the elements necessary to create an explosion. And think of the explosion as information. We can store the blasting caps and the fuse and the dynamite and the fire and all that, so we can store all that. Okay? We just can't store the explosion. At the moment that final process, relevant process, has been applied to the data, we have a moment of information. Now, what's really interesting is in our lifetime, we have spent, we created the computer in our own image. Okay, it's definitely a techno-god complex that we have. Okay, we think the computer should act like us. So we've tried to use the way we think to develop these computers. Now, what I find interesting is the extreme anthropomorphic thing that we have done. Okay, we do not refer to these devices as retrieving and storing. We refer to them as reading and writing. Okay, when we figured out that someone could take and inject code into our system that was inappropriate or that could cause damage, we suddenly decided to call that a virus and say that the computer has been infected. Okay? We want that computer to be, it's because we understand us and we think we do. What's really interesting is we've spent all our time taking the way we think and store and process in database technology, and it's exactly backwards, because the only storage mechanism that I know of on the planet where we can store information is our head. What we can't store here is data. I mean, unless, of course, any of you have a list of colors in your head that you absolutely do not know why they're there. Or phone numbers, but you don't know whose they are. But you know this phone number. Or addresses that you don't know who lives there. Okay, that would be data. Okay, that would be data. We can't store data. We can only store information. Go ahead. Here's your opportunity to innovate. A tiny head start in access to information about information creates the advantage. It could be the stock market, it could be in marketing. I dare say I don't know enough about it, but I have to assume that it certainly could be in warfare. It's one of those things where, I don't ever have to have been in combat to know that if I can think faster than my competitor, I'm likely going to win the war. Okay? I guess I have been in combat. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. And there were no white picket fences where I lived, and so I understood that learning faster than the other guy often meant that I got to keep my tennis shoes. I want to focus on this a little bit because I think it may be applicable. This was the model I was talking about. How am I doing on time? I'm over. I'm done. Okay, then press the button and let's build this model. What do we have here? We have a scale where our vertical axis is value potential and divided into value realization, and our horizontal axis is time. This is a business innovation cycle. We vet the technologies, we match them with an economic opportunity, we execute for innovation, we bring it to the market, and it's at that moment, and only that moment, that we have any understanding of the value that we may or may not have created. The point I want to make, and I was discussing this with the Admiral, I asked him a very pointed question because I just wanted the answer. I said, is the process upon which we are vetting technologies and bringing them to market, is it driven by the emergence of the technology or the emergence of a perceived problem? Now, if it's driven by the emergence of a perceived problem, that means we're here. If it's driven by the emergence of the technology, that means we're living down here. And if we're living down here, we are living at the lowest level of value potential. Now that doesn't mean that you can't take the technology and go, that gives me a great idea. What it means is that is the only way you're going to get value out of it. And we tend to do a lot of work. My dad always used to say, it's hard to remember when you're up to your tail in alligators that your job was to drain the swamp. And what he was trying to tell me is your job is to drain the swamp, you go in and get yourself a bunch of, you find you got a bunch of alligators, you got to fight them, you got to eradicate them, you come out, you're bloody, you're torn, you're ripped, you can barely walk. It's at that point when you might be tricked into thinking you've accomplished something. The problem is there's still water in the swamp. What we've done is created value potential, we just haven't created value. Let's look at an example we all know. We're going to wrap this up. Go ahead and let's look at this slide. This was Jeff Bezos' use of this model. He did this. Well, the emergence of the technology. He married it with an economic opportunity. He executed the marriage of that economic opportunity. Now, at this point, I want to focus on something. He has no value. He has a lot of pent-up value potential, but he has no value. It was only when he released it and executed it, then measured it, and fed back the value of that measurement to improve this process, that value began to emerge. But interestingly, it emerges almost instantaneously because it's a digital business model, as opposed to an atoms and molecules business model. Let's close it up. Okay. I don't think there's any such thing as being creative. So if you're walking around here thinking, gee, we just got to be more creative, I don't think so. I think you're as creative as you're going to get. You are already a creative being. Whatever you got, you got. Innovation is more about psychology than thinking. It's not about, 50-pound heads. We need them. But it's about how we get them to behave and how we get them to think. They're not the same thing. Creativity will spawn a new idea, but innovation is the vehicle, the model upon which we execute, assess, revise, and improve. That's where value comes from, is innovation. And it's not about what isn't digital, it's about, it is about what isn't digital. We just have to quit looking at the atoms and molecules, learn to see through them, learn to see around them and say, what if they weren't here? What if I didn't have the grocery store anymore? I certainly would still have groceries. So how would I get them? How would I acquire them? What changes in my behavior would have to occur? That's the innovation sweet spot as far as I'm concerned. If I have left any time for discussion, I'm happy to entertain it. We do? Questions? By the way, I don't know if anybody in TV land can hear the questions, so I will try and repeat them. Okay. Any questions or comments that you want to argue with me? I'm fine with that too. Sir?
What's Plan B if digital environment fails?
There isn't one.
Well, that's part of our problem, is we have a competitor who's trying to deny that digital environment in many situations.
Oh, I see. Okay. In other words, you're looking at like the Chinese hacking into our databases and things like that.
We lose the internet for whatever reason.
Yeah. There's good news about that problem, losing the internet. There actually there's a graphic. I could probably find it out on the internet. There's actually a graphic of global connectivity, and it's been determined that the peer-to-peer network, the ad hoc, informal peer-to-peer connectivity that would exist, that if we were thinking of this in the Earth cross-section metaphor, the internet lies at the core. This peer-to-peer connectivity lies at the periphery. It's mathematically been calculated that if, in fact, all 13 major servers were to suddenly disappear and the internet ceases to exist, that peer-to-peer connectivity would remain. And while we would have to find a way to activate that and channel information through it, that we absolutely would, we're almost at a critical mass to the point where we can't lose connectivity. We'd have to lose electricity. Our power, and I think that's a real threat. But I mean, as long as we can power that peer-to-peer connectivity at the crust, that I don't think is going to be a problem. Internet 2 is partly a solution to that. Okay, the Abilene network and things like that, where we're going to take the internet away from the consumer and give it to the academy and the military. And I mean, it was a gift from the military in the first place, you know. And so I think Internet 2 is an attempt to create a layer of security for that type of thing. But I don't have a good answer for that because I don't think there is a plan B. Question? Yes, sir.
Turn yours off, George. He'll turn it.
Oh, I got to turn my mic off. Okay.
Turn it.
Right, she told me that too.
How much have you studied about the works of the OODA loop and John Boyd to arrive at your conclusions, because you're on the same path?
I have certainly looked at that body of knowledge, and I don't profess to be at that level of thinking. But to me, this is just, kind of horse sense. I mean, this is just really kind of horse sense. I can't change what, I know I got to talk again. I can't change what's going to happen. How many PhDs does it take to run a microphone? Really? I can't change what's coming down the pipe. I just have to learn to be agile. But I can tell you that I know that everywhere I look, where I see atoms and molecules, I know they're not going to be there conceivably before my time is up on this planet. And so I tend to focus on them. It's like when you buy a new car, then you start seeing that car everywhere you go. You sit at a stoplight, there's 6 of them you never saw before. Really, I mean, it's what it is. The digital era is there will be no, I don't know what to call the era beyond the digital era, because I can't think into millions and billions. I just think we haven't even scratched the surface of what's coming. Have a question? Sir?
Assuming that Negroponte is right, which it sounds like you think he is, So your premise that we need to turn atoms and molecules into digits and bits, how do you explain the dot-com bust that occurred earlier this decade when many attempts to do that failed?
Well, because they were stupid. I mean, that's the short answer, okay? I mean, you know, during the dot-com era, you could take a bag of trash and paint .com on it and get several $1 million worth of venture capital. So I think the dot-com bust was a result of greed and zeal, not a result of sound thinking at all. I don't think that the dot-com industry in terms of investment is unviable. I don't think techno stocks are unviable, but I think we lost sight of the fact that business, and no matter how we do it, still has to be, you know, revenues minus expenses equals profit or loss. And for the dot-com era suddenly had this magical formula that seemed to think that we, you know, just because there weren't bricks and mortar and atoms and molecules, that we're not subject to that rule. So I think we're getting it right. I think that's why I'm a big believer of Nekopani's treatise. And I just think that was kind of a blip. That was an anomaly where we got greedy and we got it wrong. And hopefully we learned from our mistakes. And I don't expect to see that again.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, I'm off.
Test. Okay. Yeah, I've got a question that I think it goes back to Bill's squeezing the tomatoes and the description we just heard about the .com bust. And also an example that I've been kind of thinking about for the last half hour while you've been talking, and it's a matter of trust. We don't really trust this yet. And one of the examples I'm thinking of that hasn't really been brought up is when William the Conqueror took over England. He did this doomsday book analysis of everything that he just acquired. The British tried to do that in 1970 digitally, and 20 years later, they could still read what William the Conqueror had back in 1088, but we couldn't read the one in the 1970s. So how do we get around this trust thing? How do we build this up? How do we get to the point where a file that was made in some kind of proprietary file format 20 years ago, we can still get to that information. We can still get to that data. How do we get to that point of trusting this?
See, you gotta, I understand exactly what you're saying. I think anything that human beings or any sentient being that can reason, if there's a lack of trust, it's normally rooted in a lack of understanding. You know, if a dog doesn't know you, they seem to be naturally trusting. But if one human being has beat the dog, the dog's going to extrapolate that and take it to all human beings until it understands that that isn't an appropriate way of doing it. I think the more we understand about this, the more trust we will have. But more to your point, it's because we think we're storing information. We're not. We're just storing data. And then we forget the process. And the fact that anybody can store data and then keep the process in their head to convert it to information means there's going to be an awful lot of data that you're going to stumble upon that you have no idea why it's there. You can't find the owner. I think we need to do a better job of cataloging. I think we need to do a better job of understanding what should be stored and what shouldn't be stored. I think our mediums are extinguishable, and we need to find non-extinguishable, non-volatile mediums. We tend to take incremental steps when we create these mediums, and then we still try and convert everything to that incremental step, and before we can convert everything to the next level of storage, we have a better level of storage. So we're taking the same ground over again. Now, again, I'm not a military strategist, but I'm pretty sure you don't like doing that. And yet I think in the data world, that's exactly what we're doing. We're just moving data from one pocket to the other. And instead of figuring out, maybe we just leave it there for a minute, okay, till we can figure out where we really need this. In my field, I teach my students that information systems is the study of the movement of data to the locus of a decision at an appropriate time. So it doesn't matter where it is, where it's stored. It matters where it's needed. You can store it anywhere, but you've got to be able to get it where it's needed, to the locus of the decision at the moment that explosion has to take place. And there's our problem, in a nutshell.
Okay, so I think I'll ask the last question. With this digital explosion of all the good stuff, there's also efforts by criminals, right? I was reading a thing the other day where, more and more criminals are turning to cybercrime because I think for the same things you've already described. Hey, I can get a lot more bang for my buck by going after spoofing ATMs and those kind of things. And you saw that there was a big ring where they got millions of dollars out of ATMs in a coordinated worldwide strike. How do we deal with, yes, going digital, but B, at the same time protecting it from the criminals who will go digital as fast as we do?
I have a long answer for that, but we don't have time for it. The short answer is I think we need to slow down our innovations just a hair. Just change the speed limit a little bit. And during that reduction in speed, I think we need to also begin to consider the negative implications of new technology and a launch of technology while we are considering and perfecting the positive implications of that technology. We don't do that very well. We in our world, we tend to legislate by tombstone. People die, and then we say, oh, man, we got to fix this. Okay, see, the problem was there before they died. Okay, it just wasn't motivating to us because we were busy looking at the good things. We're busy rationalizing the cost or something like that. I think we need to build downside risk management into any execution of an economic opportunity. And if we can't find what's bad about it, we shouldn't move forward. Because that doesn't mean that finding out what's bad about it means you shouldn't move forward. It just means you will move forward in a more informed and guarded and measured manner. Short answer. Thank you all for your attention today, by the way.